Hello, welcome to another pole position on a history hack. We haven't had one of these for quite a while because Alex banned me yet again from doing anything to do with 20th century and more specifically World War II because, we all want more World War II, but Alex said no. So I went on the hunt and I found someone who does medieval Polish history. So I'm really excited to learn something new here because this is completely outside of my comfort zone. So what I've done, I've gone and found Agata Zielinska, who literally a few weeks ago completed her PhD. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
She concentrates her research on the relationship between the papacy and the Polish church during the Middle Ages. So we're going to be doing a bit of religious things, stepping on a few toes, I think, but never mind. Hi, Agatha. Welcome on the podcast.
Hi, hello. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. And any opportunity to talk about the papacy and Poland and the Middle Ages is a good opportunity. So,
do you know what? I love this because we both have a common kind of historical thing, which is Poland. But you're literally on one side of the century and like 100. Do you know what? I don't even know anymore how to pronounce all this number thing. You're one side, I'm on the other, so it's quite interesting to see and to talk about this kind of stuff because in Poland, as you very well know, we very rarely talk about anything but the 20th century.
Yes and no, I feel, which you'll be hearing a lot of yes and no from me today. I think
that's fine.
But
that's fine. We can do yes and a no.
Yeah, but I think I agree with you that a big focus is sort of 20th century World War II, post-World War history. And then it gets sad because everyone forgets about the wonderful Middle Ages that we can talk about.
Exactly. So what we're going to do, we're not just going to educate me, we're not just going to educate the Polish nation, but we're going to educate everyone.
Fabulous.
Great. I think let's start off with the first one. So I'm going to give you a statement. Let's be controversial, just for fun. So without the church, there would be no Polish nation state today. How true is this statement?
Well, yes and no, I would say, again.
That very, very many yes and no's, but it's fine. Explain yourself.
Explain myself. So each country likes telling its story, right? And I think in Poland, it's really, really common to tell the story of the Polish nation, the Polish kingdoms when they existed, and eventually the Polish nation state by focusing on the fact that Poland was a Latin Christian polity. So there's this trend in academic history, in the history that kids get taught at school, and sort of just in the public conscience, that because Poland adopted Christianity in the 10th century, that started the path towards nationhood. And I think, there's definitely something to it. So I'm not trying to say this is a complete lie. Because I'm not trying to step on all the toes, all the possible toes.
Just a few.
But just a few. You need to take that with a grain of salt, I think. And to sort of talk about the Middle Ages more generally. It's a generalization, but it's a useful one, that the clergy, so, the priests of the church, the bishops, the pope, etc., they provided useful services to society. And what I mean by that is, in the Middle Ages, they were the ones that could write. They were the ones that could read. Therefore, they were the ones that could produce documents that historians study. So in that sense, because, with the adoption of Christianity by the Polish Duke, written sources started appearing much more commonly, and written sources that were produced in Poland started appearing a lot more. So, in that sense, yes, we can retrace Polish history because of sources produced by the church, but is that enough to say that without the church there would be no Poland? I don't think so.
Well, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this and give us a bit of context. So how did all of this start?
How did all of this start? So to take the point of view of, no church, no Polish state, there's this Polish leader, warrior, ruler called Mieszko I. And he was acquiring power throughout sort of the second half of the 10th century in, the lands that today we would call Poland. And in 965, I think, I'm sure someone's going to call me out and say that this date is contested now, but whatever. For the sake of argument, 965, he married a Czech princess, Dobrawa or Dobrawka, who was Christian. So her family, the Czech royal family, the Przemyślids, had already converted to Christianity, and they converted to Latin Christianity. So, they accepted the Pope's authority, they accepted the authority of Rome, versus, Orthodox Christianity, which was based around Constantinople. So in order for this to work, Mieszko had to convert to Christianity as well. So in 966, he was baptized. And this is sort of the date that everyone in Poland knows. It was not just the baptism of Mieszko, it was the baptism of Poland. And that's when Polish history started, because the church entered onto the stage. And obviously this is a hugely important moment, because I guess the way I like to think about it is, he joined a club. He joined a Latin Christian club, so therefore he had contacts with the Czechs. He had contacts with the neighboring Holy Roman Empire, so the Germans. And, because he was now a Christian, the sorts of relationships they had were slightly different if he remained pagan. Because, had he remained pagan, he would have been open to conquest and conversion. That was, more violent, etc. So he joined this club, and then also by joining this club, he's, him and the elites in Poland started establishing connections with the Pope himself, the popes in Rome. So, it was a useful thing to do at that time.
So basically, it was an ideal idea to join this club because it brings better contacts and better relationships with other, let's say, in inverted commas, kingdoms in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. And for sure. And then sort of the debates around this, and people still, I think every sort of anniversary of this 966 date, every anniversary of Mieszko's baptism, there's this massive debate about, okay, did he convert for political reasons so that he could join this club, or did he convert because he actually believed, in sort of the ideals preached by whatever, the Christians that were around him. And it's, to me, that's such a weird conversation to be having, because obviously we're never going to know.
That is
right.
What would you, if you could and had, obviously everybody has an opinion, what would your opinion be on this? A or B?
Yes and no. Again, yes and no.
a little bit of everything.
A little bit of both, because I think it's a quite cynical view to take such a decision as completely political, because people in history, people today, they all have some sort of spiritual life, right? Whether we call it religion or whatnot. So, it might have been the case that when Mieszko heard, what his new bride was saying about Christianity, he was like, okay, maybe there's something to it. But that doesn't stop him from, taking advantage of the political benefits that this could bring. So I guess that's my personal opinion.
So we've more or less now understood how all of this started. But, however, Poland wasn't always a kingdom in the Middle Ages. And to understand this a little bit better and the relationships of what we're going to go on to in a moment, can you give us a brief timeline of what happened?
Sure. Everyone loves a timeline. I promised myself that I would create a timeline when I was doing my PhD to make my life easier. But surprise, surprise, I never did.
Do you know what? We always promise ourselves that in our research, and then it's just everywhere.
Yeah. And I felt so bad because at some point to a group of students who, it was the first time that they were learning about the Middle Ages in Europe at, first class of term, I was like, you guys should create a timeline for yourselves. It's so useful, blah, blah, blah. And like under the table, my fingers were crossed because I was like, nope, didn't happen for me. But anyway, if people like timelines.
So moving on to your timeline that you've now created for us.
Exactly.
And not your PhD.
Yeah. So thank you. This was a really useful learning experience for me. So yes, timeline. Let me look at my notes again, because I'm sort of perpetually worried that I mess up dates, but whatever. Historian.
Can I just tell you, we all mess up dates. Don't worry about it.
Sure.
Only the people out there who are complete sticklers for dates, they're the problem.
I think so, because honestly, who cares if something happened in 1116 or 1117? Does it make that big of a difference? Anyway.
It's only 1,000 years ago.
Exactly. No one is gonna die because of this today.
But if you do this in my research, that is the end of the world.
Yes, you're very correct. And I would not want to be in your place, to be fair.
Right, so hit us, go for it. Tell us what happened, to give us this timeline.
Okay, so we've got 966, the beginning of Polish history. Nothing existed before that. Mieszko becomes a Christian.
Sorry, I'm really sorry that I'm laughing. I shouldn't. It's inappropriate. Keep going.
I think it's very appropriate. But anyway, 966, Mieszko is baptized. Though actually that date itself is contested because people think, maybe it was 964, 965, whatever. 966. Baptism
around that time.
Exactly. But the thing is, he was never crowned king, so he was a duke. So if you think about prestige and that sort of club of European kingdoms and monarchies, it was he hadn't reached that very top. But then his son Bolesław Chrobry. So I'm going to be throwing in some Polish sobriquets for the rulers because they're just really common. And I think they're also, a lot of them are hilarious. This guy Chrobry, it means the brave. So not particularly hilarious, but I promise there will be some weird ones coming up. So anyway, Bolesław the First, Mieszko's son, was very briefly crowned just before his death in 1025. And then, his son, Mieszko II, because, we all like giving the same name to everyone in history or whatever. People in history all had the same names, which makes our lives super easy.
Do you know what? It's like in English history. Charles, James, Elizabeth. Yeah, get that.
Yeah, exactly. So his son, he inherited the crown. And then until about the mid 12th century, Poland was a kingdom. So there was a king. And they were all from a single dynasty called the Piasts. But in 1138, and I know this date, and this is the correct date, Bolesław III, Krzywousty, which means the wry mouth. So his mouth was crooked, which apparently his nickname came from the fact that he broke a lot of promises or lied to people. So that's a great nickname to have. And Anyway, he died in 1138. And instead of passing his kingdom and his crown to his son, he had 3 sons, I believe, 4 sons. But basically what happened is, instead of passing on the kingdom as a whole to his eldest son, he decided to split the kingdom into 4 parts. Three of these parts went to his 3 sons, respectively, and then the 4th one around Krakow, which was, one of, I don't think you could call it a capital of the kingdom at that point, because there were other places which were equally important, but it was one of the most important areas of the kingdom. Krakow and sort of the primacy amongst the princes, the primacy amongst the dukes, would go to the eldest son. And then the rule was that, each branch of the family would have their own, areas of the kingdom, duchies of the kingdom to rule. And then whoever was the oldest would also rule Krakow. So this was the so-called rule of seniority. And as you can probably tell, it's a good plan on paper, but we know that people would never sort of agree to this. So for the next few hundred years, there's almost constant war between the different dukes of Poland as to, who ruled what and who was the most important one of them.
I think this is where our next question is quite relevant, isn't it?
I think so.
Okay, so this is where the Pope gets involved. So how did Poland relate to the papacy? In layman's terms, how was Poland's relationship with the Pope? And what role did the popes play in all of this?
I'm not going to say yes and no, because that doesn't make sense, but it's
maybe.
Sort of another...
Kind of.
Kind of, another sort of classic historian's answer, it's complicated. Because the role, imagine you're a pope, which all of us imagine constantly. You're sitting comfortably in Rome, maybe not always Rome, and maybe not always comfortably, because, people are out to get you, they're unhappy with what you're doing, etc., etc., etc. But the Pope is just simply too far away from most areas in Europe to do anything tangible. And yet popes did have a lot of authority over people, because people sought out that authority. People wanted someone who was, I guess one way of saying it is someone who was above the different, divides between kingdoms, etc., whose authority was accepted by both sides of a conflict, for example. So the popes had been in sort of, involved from afar in Polish history, even prior to this sort of fragmentation, because there's some sources suggesting that, when Mieszko I's son was crowned, the Pope at that time did give some sort of tacit approval for that coronation to happen, and people explaining it by saying that, the Pope needed a strong ally against Poland, against the papacy's struggles with the Holy Roman Empire, so, Germany. So, there's these sorts of negotiations that happened before. But again, we sort of need to remember that, fine, the Pope endorsed Bolesław the Brave as King of Poland, but what did that mean? What difference did it make? And that's always the tricky question.
Did it make any difference?
I think it added legitimation. If Bolesław Chrobry could say that the Pope approved for him to have a crown and be independent of the Holy Roman Empire, then it would be a little bit more difficult for the Holy Roman Emperor to sort of attack with impunity. Because, eventually, if things got really escalated, which I don't think they did at that point, and if the Pope really wanted to, he could sort of rally other kingdoms and be like, well, you know, you need to go and sort this out because the Holy Roman Emperor is, you know, disregarding what I said. Equally, the Pope could excommunicate people, which to us doesn't seem very serious, but excommunication meant, if you're excommunicated, you can't get to heaven. Okay, fine. But in practical terms, it also meant that sort of any authority you have, any allegiance you had on earth was void. So if the Holy Roman Emperor was excommunicated, then all of his, you know, his princes, the people that supported him, had no obligation whatsoever to listen to him, to pay taxes, to give military aid. So, you know, it was that threat of the situation getting a little bit sticky that made a difference if, you know, the Pope said, okay, you know, this guy can be a king. At the time when Poland was fragmented, it was interesting because most of the dukes that were, you know, at war with one another, they always did try to like make sure that they had the protection of the papacy, and the protection of the papacy could literally mean that they had a letter from the Pope that acknowledged their rule. So like that, you know, that sort of, again, that idea that the Pope was guaranteeing somewhere was there, but the way things played out was very much on the ground in terms of, you know, who had a stronger army, who had the right sort of network and alliances and stuff like that.
Here's my piece of paper from the Pope. I deserve to rule.
Yeah, and then the other, exactly, but then the other person could be like, well, here's my piece of paper from the Pope. I should be able to rule.
Oh my God. It was chaos, wasn't it?
I think it was. I think it was complete chaos. And then, like, you know, bringing this back to sort of the Polish church, so the bishops that were actually in Poland and were involved in these conflicts, you know, they were members of the elite. They had their political alliances. So sort of the papal support, the support of the Pope that you got was usually as strong as, you know, your local clerics could sort of enforce it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so Poland's in chaos at this point. Dukes fighting amongst dukes. There is no Polish kingdom. So then at the beginning of the 14th century, it actually becomes recreated. So it actually becomes the Polish kingdom again. So what role does the Pope have in all of this?
Again, a complicated role. But basically what happened is, as you said, you know, lots of war, lots of dukes going at each other's throats, all of them trying to get the support of bishops and the Pope, etc. And actually, like, this is quite a gory episode in Polish history, because in 1295, one of the Polish dukes, Przemysław II, without a fun nickname, sadly, he managed to sort of overpower most of his other competitors, and sort of he got the Polish archbishop, so the most important local cleric, to crown him in 1295. And I think there was some sort of like tacit papal approval, or if it wasn't approval, it was just like, yeah, whatever, do what you want, we're not going to stop this. But then he got killed. He got murdered in suspicious circumstances.
Isn't that always what happens?
Yeah, basically. And I think, like, even the medieval sources that talk about this, you know, some chronicles say that it was the Brandenburg family from Germany, from the Holy Roman Empire, that had him assassinated.
Isn't it always the Germans?
Well, that's the thing. So the other sources say it was the two Polish noble families that had him assassinated.
I think that's the usual line throughout Polish history. What I find is option A, it was the Germans. Option B, it was our own.
Option C, it was the Russians.
Option C, it was the Russians.
Exactly.
Sorry, I interrupted your flow. Keep going.
No, that's completely fine. Then in the year 1300, to make things just even more complicated, because why not? The Czech king Wenceslaus II, Wacław in Polish, he had a claim to Krakow, and even though he wasn't particularly liked by a lot of the Polish noble families, he wasn't particularly liked by the archbishop. The archbishop did crown him, and I think he did that because it was just too much chaos, and it's better to have a king we don't like rather than continuous bloodshed. He died of natural causes, as far as we know, 5 years later. But then his son, who in theory took the throne in 1305, was stabbed a year later in 1306.
Oh my God. It's like, it's just knock him off, really.
Yeah. The thing is, so I don't know much about who he was stabbed by, but he was stabbed like back in Czechia, in Bohemia. Fun fact, it's no longer the Czech Republic, it's Czechia. I don't know if you knew that, but I trip myself up every time.
I still get confused. It's fine. It's, for example, I call, which is now Lviv, I still call it Lvov. So, and I still get criticised for it. But anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, aside. But anyway, so he got stabbed. So again, more chaos. And then finally we get to sort of the actual long-lasting recreation of the Polish kingdom. At sort of the very, let's say 1318, 1317, somewhere around that, a Polish bishop, Gerward of Włocławek, again, no fun nickname, went to see the Pope John the 22nd, who was at that time in Avignon in France. It was today France rather than in Rome. It was just a time of papal history where the papacy, the Roman papacy was not actually in Rome. But anyway, he spent quite a lot of time lobbying, as we would say today, the Pope to endorse one of the Polish dukes, Władysław Łokietek, which means Władysław the elbow high, because apparently he was very short, only elbow height. So Gerward tried to lobby the Pope to endorse him as the King of Poland. And that at that time, it put the Pope in quite a tricky situation, because this was a time when he was trying to maintain good relations with the Holy Roman Empire. And he was also trying to maintain good relations with the Teutonic Knights, Krzyżacy, who are the bane of Polish historians, I like to think, because everything boils down to Krzyżacy.
That is also very true.
But I'm not going to open that can of worms. But basically, the Pope was, in a tricky position, but again, sort of didn't give Gerward a letter saying we are happy that for Władysław to be crowned King of Poland, but he basically said, okay, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to publicly say this is fine, but go ahead. In 1320, Władysław was crowned as King of Poland in Krakow by the Polish archbishop. Spent a lot of his reign, which lasted about 13 years, sort of, again, still carrying out wars to sort of consolidate his rule. But then when he died, his son took over in 1333. And
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Kazimierz.
Yes, exactly.
I think we should move on to Kazimierz, because he's kind of, he's the fun one, really, isn't he, in this story?
Yeah, he is. He is.
So Kazimierz Wielki, or Kazimierz the Great, um, he messed up his relationship with the church, didn't he? How did he do that?
Yeah, he's a bit of a pickle. I have to say, because on the one hand, he ruled for so long. He ruled for around 40 years. His period is known as sort of the height of Polish medieval, like not just political history, but it was just a time of prosperity, law reform. There's a saying in Polish, zastał Polskę drewnianą, zostawił murowaną, or something like that, which like translates to, you know, he encountered Poland built all in wood, but he left it built all in stone.
I love it. So, throwing a bit of Polish in there, loving it.
Why not? Why not? So yeah, like super important, lots of good things happening, but he himself was a bit of a rogue one at times. So one of the things which sort of made the church, both locally and the papacy, a little bit uneasy is that he was a little bit of a ladies' man.
They're always a ladies' man, aren't they?
Exactly. So I think he had 4 wives, which is completely fine because, you know, he married, had children, his wife died, then he remarried. Fine. No problem.
But
exactly. There's a but. There's a but. According to like not just one chronicle, but I think quite a few different medieval sources, and fair enough, not all of them were written in his lifetime, but it is what it is. That's what we have. So I'm gonna believe them. He had a series of lovers. He had a series of concubines, 4, 5, 6 maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. With whom he had illegitimate children. And like, you know, fair enough. That's not super uncommon to have illegitimate children. But like, I think the problem was for a lot of clerics that he was quite open about it.
Oh my gosh. That is not a good thing. Here is my concubine, here is my wife. Concubine 1, wife 3.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the sort of the most intriguing story in all of this is that one of them was supposedly Jewish. So supposedly he had a Jewish lover, Estera or Esterka, who, you know, that was, you know, a bit too transgressive. But
because there were quite a lot of laws at that time, though, weren't there?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, again, that's another sort of interesting aspect of his reign and sort of his rule in relation to the church, because Kazimierz the Great passed and also sort of confirmed previous laws passed by other Polish rulers, which ensured that Jewish people could settle in Poland under sort of royal protection. So they were allowed to establish their own towns and communities, and you know, they were free to practice Judaism at that point.
Do you think that was influenced by his mistress?
Oh, good question. You know, was she whispering in his ear to say that he should do that? If only we knew. Damn it.
Where are those sources? Where are they?
Where are their secret letters or tapes recorded undercover?
Oh, that would be. Do you know what? I'd like to think that he did have a Jewish mistress. So in my mind, he had the Jewish mistress, and she helped the Jewish communities strive in Poland at the time. In my mind.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that too.
So did just to add something into there. So how was the relationship between, because obviously he helped the relationship with the Jewish communities and the church, but in general, what was it like?
So that's what I mentioned before, that it was really interesting because the papacy from the 13th century passed a series of decrees or a series of laws that were meant to be observed by all Christians, which stipulated that Jews had to wear specific clothes, specific hats, or symbols that showed it, like made it clear to everyone that they were Jewish. The papacy passed certain laws about how Jews could only live in specific places, could only perform specific jobs, couldn't intermarry with Christians, etc., etc., etc. So not great, like, horrible even. But at the same time, the papacy claimed to be the protector of Jews living within Christendom. So, the way that popes explained it to themselves was that, yes, we're setting out these rules for the Jewish people, but it's for their protection.
Okay, that makes sense. Not.
Of course. Of course. And the interesting thing is that there were two papal legates in Poland, and a papal legate was a representative of the Pope sent directly to a specific place, in our case, Poland. And they were incredibly powerful because they, like, according to sort of the laws, the canon law, the law of the church, a papal legate was basically like a mini pope sent to a specific area to carry out pope duties. So two of them, while they were in Poland, passed laws which basically repeated what I said before, that Jews need to wear specific clothes, need to live in specific areas, need to or can only perform this number of tasks or whatever, these are the professions they can do. And they shouldn't, mix with Christians unless under very specific circumstances. But then, so we've got that. We've got Kazimierz saying it's fine if you establish your own communities. I'm going to protect you with my royal law. You're, incredibly important to the kingdom in terms of, the sorts of industry, trade, crafts, etc., etc., that Jewish people happen to excel at this point. And then there's the Polish clerics, there's the Polish bishops. And as far as I understand, in this period, there was no Polish church law passed with regards to the status of the Jewish settlers, of the Jewish, inhabitants of the kingdom. So that's interesting because you'd expect either for them to sort of staunchly support what the papacy was saying and be like, okay, we're not happy you're here, but you're here, so we, in theory, have to protect you. Or they could have, thrown their lot with Kazimierz and been like, well, this is fine. We can all get along. So that's a weird thing that I don't really know what to think about. And I probably should do more research about. And probably also there's people who know a lot more about this than I do.
There you go. That's your next paper lined up and ready to go for you.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's do a bit of modern history, just for fun, because I can't go away without doing something modern. So how did Poles in the 19th and 20th century relate to the medieval church, including Poles that are around the world, like, for example, Poles like me who ended up in the UK after the Second World War? Well, not directly after the Second World War,
Are you that old? Are you really that old?
My grandparents, but people who listen to the podcast know this. But anyway.
Wow, okay. I'm glad you reassured me of that because I was getting a bit worried. But anyway.
I look very good for my age. Thank you very much.
Yes. So that's the thing. I mentioned, we started this whole podcast with a discussion about how every country likes telling their story. And for Poland, the story is that, without the church, there would be no Polish nation and no Polish nation state. And I think that was, that has its roots in Polish history, because the fact that in the 18th, 19th centuries, Poland did not exist as as a kingdom or a nation or whatever sort of, there's a recurring trend here, isn't there?
Yes.
So in the 19th century, and probably earlier, I not probably, for sure earlier, when there were historians writing the history of the Polish nation state at a time when Poland as a political entity did not exist, they had to create a narrative. And that narrative was strongly tied to sort of the presence of Latin Christianity, the presence of Christianity in Poland, because it gave the medieval Polish kingdom legitimate what? Sorry.
Sorry. Legitimate, say what? Anyway, sorry, keep going.
The medieval Polish state was a legitimate state because it was a Christian state, and it also differentiated Poland from, let's say, Russia, which was Orthodox, and it was very important. It for the people writing in the late 18th and 19th centuries, the fact that Poland had been, a proper Christian medieval kingdom was grounds for there to be a Polish state at that time. It was proof that Poland as a nation existed from time immemorial and needed to be recreated. And then it was, after World War I, and then World War II happened, because life is not easy.
Nope.
And then after World War II, huge changes into what was Poland. And obviously Poland was, governed by a communist government regime, whatever you want to call it. But still, the idea of a Polish nation state was incredibly important at that time. So historians writing in the 50s and 60s in Poland, even though, and they could have been actually practicing sort of, they could have espoused Marxist views and values or whatnot, or they could have just had to write in a Marxist way because that's the only way they could get published. Like that's a whole different discussion about historians from that period. But basically, it was a time when Marxist historiography was written. And some people are surprised at just how much people at that time wrote about the church, because, if you say Marxist, immediately what comes to mind is, okay, religion doesn't matter, it's inherently bad, etc., etc., etc. But even Marxist historians of Poland had to talked about the church at length, because it was this idea that that the church, the introduction of the church, allowed for the Polish nation and the nation state to develop. So it was important, but it was treated incredibly instrumentally. So, without this sort of spiritual aspect, without thinking that it was a religion that mattered to people, it was more in those like political choices and consequences.
I'm going to throw something in the hat here. So coming from a modern perspective, modern historian, I'm going to disregard everything before the 1918. And I kind of
no history happened then.
No history. That's what Poland was created in 1918. So if you look back and you look, especially during the Second World War, if you look during the communist period, for me, I believe that the church was very useful at that time. because it did help unify Poles. I mean, obviously, I can't judge anything before that because it is not my time of history.
Sure.
But for that perspective of the 20th century, I think the church was incredibly important. And I don't quite agree that there would be no Polish nation state today, because people don't seem to factor in culture, language, and everything else that comes with it. But I think religion does play, especially in the 20th century, it plays an important role.
No, I agree, definitely. And that's why I always say like yes and no.
Yeah.
It's that interesting thing that even Marxist historians who would disregard, who you'd assume would disregard religion, couldn't, because it was so important to Polish history, if you see what I mean.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and like I think because religion was such an important aspect of 20th century history, before, during, and after World War II, I think that amplified the sort of the need, or even it made it more pressing and more useful, and just almost naturally it made historians want to write about the medieval church as being so important to the creation of the nation state eventually.
Which is perfect for you.
Exactly.
Perfect. Listen, I'm going to say thank you, because this has been so insightful and I've learned so much. And hearing the names of some of these kings and dukes in the English form has been incredibly entertaining for me. But this has been so insightful.
I didn't mention the best one.
Yes.
Władysław Laskonogi, Władysław Spindleshanks.
Do you know what? When we post this up, I'm going to post all of these at the bottom so people can get their laughs in now, because I think they're far more entertaining in English than they are for me in Polish. But thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I've learned so much about the Polish church, the papacy, especially in the medieval period. And this is coming from a modern historian. So thank you.
Thanks so much. I had a lot of fun, and now I have a timeline of Polish history that I can use forever. So, you know, maybe the PhD didn't accomplish that, but this podcast did.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't forget that we do exist on Patreon as History Hack, and on Patreon as well, which is Podbean's own version. Alina and I have had massive fun doing this in 2020, but life's going to change quite a lot next year, and we're going to actually have to go and earn a living, etc. If we want to keep up the regularity that we've been bringing you, and the kind of guests that we've been bringing you, and the workload, then we will need your help. So if you join us on either of those platforms, Marcus is currently working on some benefits for you, so there's going to be incentives for joining on either of those platforms. We're revamping ourselves on both of them, so don't forget to go in. You can do as little as $1 a month, and it all goes towards keeping up History Hack as regular as we've been able to bring it to you this year. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes, because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe.